From the moment Anakin Skywalker entered the Jedi Order, the Council approached him not as a student in need of guidance, but as an anomaly requiring constant surveillance. His entry point into the temple was unprecedented. Unlike typical initiates, he did not arrive as a youngling raised within the Order's cultural framework. He carried pre-existing attachments, fears, and behavioral patterns shaped outside Jedi doctrine. Rather than recognizing these factors as developmental challenges that required tailored instruction, the Council interpreted them as inherent liabilities. This framing defined their posture toward him for the entirety of his training and shaped the constraints placed upon his growth. The Council's reaction to Anakin's arrival reveals long-standing organizational tendencies within the Order. The Jedi had built a structured environment rooted in uniformity, where predictability and emotional neutrality were considered essential for stability. When Anakin entered the temple, he represented a disruption to this system. The Council assessed him through the lens of procedural risk rather than individual potential. Their immediate refusal to train him, followed by their reluctant acceptance under pressure from Qui-Gon Jinn, indicated that they viewed him not as a future leader, but as an exception to established norms. This exceptional status became the foundation of an institutional posture that hindered rather than supported his progress. Once training commenced, the Council implemented oversight measures unique to Anakin's case. They monitored his advancement closely, evaluated his emotional responses with heightened scrutiny, and discussed his development in terms of hypothetical threats rather than instructional opportunities. These practices signaled to Anakin that his role within the Order was conditional. While other Padawans were encouraged to explore uncertainty and learn through error, Anakin was expected to avoid error altogether. This double standard limited his ability to develop naturally. Growth in any discipline requires the freedom to make mistakes and refine understanding through experience. The Council's approach denied him this freedom. Anakin's relationship with the Council was further complicated by the Order's pedagogical model. The Jedi relied on a mentor-apprentice framework that assumed emotional distance between instructor and student. Such distance functioned adequately for individuals raised within the temple, who had been conditioned since infancy to regulate attachment and suppress personal bonds. Anakin, however, lacked this conditioning. His psychological development required consistent emotional support and clear communication from authoritative figures, yet the Council offered neither. They maintained rigid adherence to tradition rather than adapting instruction to meet his specific needs. This mismatch between student and system created a persistent gap between Anakin's expectations and the Order's methods. The onset of the Clone Wars amplified these structural tensions. The war transformed the Jedi from mediators into military leaders, a role that contradicted their stated mission and exposed them to responsibilities for which they were not fully prepared. This shift strained the Council's ability to provide meaningful mentorship. Anakin was placed into command positions that required rapid decision-making under extreme pressure, yet the Council continued to evaluate him according to pre-war standards of emotional restraint. Their assessments failed to account for the psychological demands of continuous combat. As a result, Anakin faced expectations that no other Jedi leadership candidate confronted. He was expected to exhibit flawless judgment in environments designed to erode emotional stability. The Council's reluctance to acknowledge Anakin's accomplishments further contributed to his sense of isolation. Throughout the war, he delivered numerous tactical successes, secured strategic victories, and protected allied populations across multiple systems. Despite these contributions, the Council remained hesitant to grant him commensurate recognition. They withheld positions of influence, delayed promotions, and questioned his reliability, even when evidence demonstrated consistent performance. This disparity between achievement and acknowledgement disrupted the feedback loop, essential for reinforcing productive behaviour. Effective institutions reward individuals who fulfill their responsibilities. The Council's hesitation to affirm Anakin's contributions conveyed that his performance did not alter their perception of him. This pattern continued when the Council made critical decisions regarding Anakin's leadership trajectory. Their refusal to grant him the rank of Master, despite appointing him to a council seat, illustrated an internal contradiction. The Council sought his participation in high-level deliberation while simultaneously denying his readiness for full authority. This incongruence reflected an underlying belief that Anakin could serve the Order, but could not fully belong to it. Such mixed messaging undermined the clarity necessary for organizational cohesion. For Anakin, the inconsistency reinforced the notion that his progress was restricted not by merit, but by institutional prejudice. Anakin's increasing responsibilities during the war highlighted the limitations of the Council's evaluative criteria. They continued to interpret emotional expression as a sign of instability, even when such expression resulted from accumulated stress and trauma associated with prolonged conflict. The Council's philosophical framework offered limited tools for understanding trauma, as the Order historically separated emotional experience from practical duty. This separation created blind spots in their assessment of Anakin's mental state. Instead of identifying signs of distress and offering structured support, the Council categorized his reactions as deviations requiring correction. This analytical misalignment ensured that his underlying needs remained unaddressed. Moreover, the Council's decision-making was shaped by institutional assumptions that clashed with the realities of war. Their traditional emphasis on detachment and neutrality could not be reconciled with the demands of military leadership, where empathy, adaptability, and relational trust are critical factors. Anakin excelled in these areas, often forming strong bonds with clones, allies, and civilians under his protection. However, because these behaviors contradicted Jedi doctrine, the Council viewed them with suspicion. They interpreted his capacity for connection not as a strength, but as a threat to stability. This perspective prevented them from recognizing that his relational skills were a primary source of his effectiveness. The Council's inability to recalibrate their framework to accommodate Anakin's strengths also influenced his interactions with other members of the Order. While peers such as Obi-Wan Kenobi developed a balanced mentorship dynamic with him, the Council, as a collective body, continued to treat him as an outlier. Their caution created an environment in which Anakin operated under constant evaluation. Such oversight can be valuable when applied constructively, but in this context, it functioned as a form of institutional pressure. Anakin was not provided with clear developmental pathways or practical tools for managing expectations. Instead, he navigated ambiguous standards that shifted according to circumstance. This institutional restraint created a precarious context when the Council asked Anakin to monitor the Chancellor. The assignment required a degree of emotional resilience and political clarity that the Council had not prepared him to manage. It placed him at the centre of conflicting loyalties without offering guidance, mentorship, or structural support. The Council's reliance on Anakin for intelligence, despite their long-standing doubts about his judgment, illustrates an inconsistency in their assessment process. They considered him too unstable for promotion, yet sufficiently reliable for a politically sensitive task that risked undermining his personal relationships. This contradiction reflects an organization struggling to maintain influence during wartime without fully understanding the consequences of its own decisions. The Council's perception of Anakin also influenced how other members of the Order interacted with him. Jedi who observed the Council's caution often mirrored these attitudes, creating an environment in which Anakin navigated implicit skepticism from multiple directions. Such conditions hindered collaborative learning, limited trust formation, and reinforced the notion that he occupied an isolated position within the institution. Over time, this isolation became self-sustaining. Individuals who receive limited support frequently develop defensive behaviors that further limit integration. The Council interpreted these behaviors as confirmation that Anakin remained unpredictable, creating a feedback loop in which distrust reinforced itself. Anakin's responses to this dynamic mirrored traits commonly observed in individuals who encounter institutional inconsistency. When expectations shift unpredictably and support systems remain undefined, individuals may respond by seeking stability from external sources. In Anakin's case, this manifested in his increasing reliance on Chancellor Palpatine, who provided predictable affirmation, consistent communication, and explicit guidance. While the Council viewed this attachment as a sign of manipulation or imbalance, they did not examine their own role in fostering the need for such external validation. Palpatine filled a structural gap created by the Council's failure to establish a coherent developmental environment. The tension between Anakin and the Council escalated during critical moments in which their objectives diverged. The Council approached the war with an underlying desire to preserve institutional authority, while Anakin approached it from the perspective of individuals directly affected by conflict. These differing priorities created friction during deliberations involving civilian casualties, military strategy, and political alliances. The Council's emphasis on detachment often conflicted with Anakin's emphasis on pragmatic intervention. When such conflicts arose, the Council interpreted Anakin's perspective as impulsive or undisciplined rather than recognizing it as a response shaped by frontline experience. This misattribution prevented meaningful dialogue and reinforced perceptions of incompatibility. The structural conditions surrounding Anakin's downfall reflect failures in risk management and leadership strategy. Organizations tasked with developing high-potential individuals must balance caution with support. The Council maintained caution but did not provide support. They monitored Anakin's behavior without offering psychological frameworks for managing trauma, political change, or personal conflict. They criticized his deviations without acknowledging the pressures that shaped them. They assigned him responsibilities without providing the institutional trust necessary for success. These patterns reveal an environment where preventive oversight replaced proactive mentorship. Such environments often produce individuals who exhibit external signs of competence while experiencing internal instability. The final stages of the Clone Wars highlight how deeply the Council's distrust affected Anakin's decision-making. When confronted with decisions that required interpreting the intentions of both the Council and the Chancellor, he lacked a stable framework for evaluating competing directives. The Council had not cultivated relational trust or provided clear ethical support. As a result, Anakin made decisions through the lens of uncertainty and suspicion. These conditions created the possibility for miscalculation. The Council viewed his actions as proof of inherent danger, but those actions were shaped by structural failures in guidance, communication, and organizational consistency. The Council's posture toward Anakin revealed limitations in the Jedi Order's adaptability. Institutions with rigid internal structures often struggle to integrate individuals who diverge from normative pathways. Anakin's unconventional background required instructional models that prioritize contextual understanding, psychological insight, and relational support. The Council did not implement such models. Instead, they maintained a system optimized for individuals raised within temple traditions. The mismatch between system and individual created friction that intensified over time. This friction was not the product of Anakin's character, but of the institution's inability to evolve its methods. After analysing the Council's decisions, patterns, and inconsistencies, a broader conclusion emerges. The Council did not actively seek Anakin's failure, but the structures they maintained ensured that his success was unlikely. Their approach to risk assessment, mentorship, emotional development, and political navigation lacked the flexibility necessary to support an individual with Anakin's history, responsibilities, and psychological profile. Their efforts to control his trajectory replaced opportunities to cultivate trust. Their emphasis on doctrine obscured their understanding of human needs. Their adherence to tradition limited their capacity for adaptive leadership. In the end, the Council's handling of Anakin demonstrates how institutions can unintentionally create the conditions for their own internal crises. The Jedi Order's inability to adapt its practices, recognize emerging needs, and respond to unprecedented circumstances produced an environment in which Anakin's failure was predetermined. His downfall was not the result of a single decision or a singular flaw. It was the culmination of a systemic pattern of distrust, restrictive oversight, and insufficient support. These structural dynamics reveal that the Council's actions did not merely fail to prevent Anakin's fall, they contributed directly to the environment that made it possible.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.